Hello, this is the Demographics Decoded podcast with me, demographer Simon Küstenmacher.
And me, Michael Yardney, property and wealth creation expert. And this is the podcast where we unveil the trends shaping our futures. Now, they say life begins at 40, but is this just a feel-good phrase or does the data actually support it? In today's episode of Demographics Decoded, Simon and I are going to explore one of life's most pivotal but misunderstood chapters, midlife. Simon, this idea came to me from an article you'd written in the New Daily, but it's not just for people in their 40s or 50s. So wherever you are in your life, whether you're just starting out, whether you're in the thick of your career, you're thinking about what's next, understanding what happens in this important phase of your life could maybe help you plan better, lead better, live with more purpose. So, Simon, I'm looking forward to our chat about this.
Well, absolutely. And we're looking today at a quote that I read many, many years ago when I would have been in my teens. A beautiful quote from Carl Jung, the famous Swiss psychologist, next to Sigmund Freud, one of the big fathers of psychology. He said life really begins at 40. Until then, you're just doing research, which I think is beautiful. And it always gave me, even as a young fella, it gave me the idea and the hope that there's more to come. I thought it was good. It's like, yeah, even if this is a bit of a slog right now, those teenage years, even if you don't really know what you're doing at university, ultimately this will lead to something. So I thought of this as a rather hopeful quote. Now I am, of course, 42, so I'm in the midst of it. So I kind of dug out the old quote and wanted to see what this actually means, particularly because there is, of course, a demographic angle behind this, that just the mid-40s now in the coming decade will be the fastest growing population cohort in Australia. So whatever we're discussing now about what it means to turn into 40 and then live through that second half of life and what happens there. That is, of course, super interesting and important on your own life's journey. But there's also a broader social element to it where we think, what does this mean for us as a whole, for us as a society, if we push the biggest generation ever, the Millennials, now into this, what we sometimes call the second half of life. So keep this always in mind as we now introduce the whole concept, because there is a bit more than just the personal story that is linked to that narrative.
Well, as a demographer, I know you love data. Does data actually show anything about life satisfaction or different shifts in stages of life when we get beyond 40?
Yeah, there is plenty of data there. So sometimes we talk about the U-curve of happiness, for example. And in the U-curve of happiness, it just means you start life very happy. Then you have more and more responsibilities thrown on you. Life becomes less happy. You have more and more responsibilities as you become a parent. And then your kids become reasonably self-sufficient. And you live through the dark night of the soul. You live through your midlife crisis. And then happiness goes up again. And it kind of peaks just after retirement. And so what we're talking about now, the mid-40s, quite often can be viewed as the midlife crisis. And the word, or the standard term here, crisis, of course, implicates that there is something negative happening, is that we question ourselves, we question our whole life choices, we try to reinvent ourselves, sometimes out of pure frustration and desperation. That can be tough on us, but yeah. Sometimes it can be viewed as the bottom, if you will. Yeah.
Well, for those of you who are new to the Demographics Decoded podcast, Simon and I did a series around Christmas time, which went through each of the different generational groups, starting from the baby boomers to the younger generations. And we explained a bit about what happens at different stages of their life. So if you're interested in that, please, once you've listened to this show, go back and have a listen to some of the old shows, each are episodes that are standalone. But Simon, we mentioned the fact that the millennials are leaving everything a bit later than their parents did. Has that changed the timing of the happiness of life? When Jung wrote about life begins at 40, that was written maybe for a different generation.
Yeah, and we would have to think so. Life really begins at 40 is maybe a bit suffered inflation, and now my life might begin in the mid-40s. And what we mean by this is that millennials, so it's not the age that is interesting, 40. It is the stage of the life cycle that we're talking about. It is the idea where you lived through the first half of life Again, not a number of years, but we'll discuss the first half of life in a bit. But so the idea is that you think about what millennials did different to previous generations. Millennials delayed many things. So they delayed the entry into the workforce by having spent more time at university. So you start your career later in life. You also delayed, partially linked, you start your parental journey later in life because you delay having kids. See first time moms in their mid 30s. So this is, a decade later than 50 years ago. And so that means everything gets pushed out a bit. We talk about this sometimes when we talk about property. First home buyership is pushed further out year after year. And that's another milestone. It kind of changes the way you think. But so that's granted. So let's say it might not be that life starts at 40, but maybe it's the mid 40s. And of course, it is
In the
very
40s.
dependent on the individual life journey. But so we must discuss what the first half of life looks like.
Sure.
And traditionally, that is very much the time of life when you are focused on building a life, when you're focused on setting yourself up. You need to get an education, find a job, start a family. You need to really establish your place in the world. It's an era of your life where you are driven. You want to prove yourself to everyone, to parents, to God, to your bosses, to ourselves. We want to prove that we are worthy, that we can do it. And so we create what Jung would call a stable identity. We create a persona, as the technical term is. And so the persona, in a sense, is the mask that we wear to fit into society. So it's quite possible, though, to just happily wear this mask and then die in our 90s without ever having entered the second half of life. So you do not have to go through both stages. But the second half of life, this is when we kind of start to question what the first half of life was about. Because you've got one more promotion, moved to the trophy house, bought a better car. And these were all nice. These were all cool milestones. They made you happy for a while. These are, car is better than the previous car. The house is in a better locations than the previous house. But you feel like there must be more. That can't be it. The goal in life cannot be just to, upgrade to just one better type of vehicle. And so you turn inwards and you do start to question all those assumptions that you have about your life. And ultimately, you then hopefully kind of discover who you are beneath those roles that you play, beneath the persona that you lived up. And so this process of discovering your true self is, Jung called it individuation. So that's the technical term, is you are discovering who you are. You create this new persona. And that roughly, in all of the patients that he worked with, that roughly started at 40. Back in the day, back close to a century ago. And say, cool, so whatever. And to go, what do we need to do? What do we need to unlock in order to be able to enter the second half of life? And ultimately, you must become able to look at your shadow. You must look at the dark sides of your personality. You must be able to look at the sins of your past life, all the bad things that you've done, where you might have hurt other people, where you might have just been a dickhead, where you lived under... you chased wrong things, so to speak. And you must look at this. You must acknowledge this. And this is very, very tough. Looking at your shadow means you take something that is happening in the unconscious and you move it into the conscious parts of your personality. And that is quite tricky. You can do this by yourself through introspection. Sometimes people go into therapy to do this. This is a long process. It's not a thing that you instantly realize and then you're solved by a knock on the head or something like this. Not at all. They have been beautiful. Like I pointed in my article, I pointed to one of my favorite movies of all times that shows a beautiful process of this, The Fisher King from 1991. It's a Robin Williams movie.
With Robin Williams.
It's amazing. And it's quite often just viewed as a bit of a weird movie, but it just shows the process of individuation in a rather dramatic, bizarre story of him playing this homeless person in New York who faces the Red Knight. So he lives in New York and he faces this crazy night, which is just a vision that he sees, but that is reflective of his shadow. So your homework today is to watch this movie, The Fisher King. Amazing, amazing movie. And that's how dramatic the process can be, to actually look at your shadow. So you see the kind of pains and near-death experiences that Robin Williams or his character goes through in the movie. We need to do those things. So we're not talking about an easy process. And because it's a hard process, many people will not not go through it. But if you go through it, you get rewarded by entering the second half of life. And that's rather cool, because that's when you realize that maybe these, milestones that you were chasing in the past, they're not pivotal moments in the universe. You are not the center of the universe. You become psychologically more complete, if you will, once you stop chasing those elusive, flawless versions of your own life and of your own personality. And you kind of just become a bit more happy with your role in the world. You don't need to desperately chase the next high, so to speak. And so you actually start to question the whole script that you've been following in the past. You become
Yes.
the best student, the high achiever, get the best house, run that marathon, secure that job, or whatever it is. So it's good that we kind of slowly let go of those things.
Now, that's interesting because at the same time, Simon, there seem to be other demographic shifts happening to people in that age group as well. Their parents start to age and sometimes need attention. Their kids move to the next phase of their life, often teenagers, and have different needs. And a lot of people start thinking about their careers. They've plateaued. Many actually think, maybe I should start a business. I've always wanted to. Lots of these demographic pictures show up at the same time.
Yeah, and I think that they're linked. I think quite a common way of this could be we sometimes talk about them, about the gray-haired entrepreneurs. So sometimes we have this vision of all entrepreneurs being like those young teenage Steve Jobs, Bill Gates types who create a business out of nowhere in their parents' garages. But the typical age for business owner for first-time business owner is actually the mid-40s. So business owners and are much founders are much older than we think. And part of this is just that. But there must be more. I want to be in control of this. And I don't need to follow the old rules. I want to do this myself. Founding a business does not need to mean that you manage to enter the second half of life. I'm not saying that. It can just be that you've found a way to make more money and buy bigger cars or whatever. But ultimately, it is, I think, a very interesting demographic marker that occurs, that there are many changes in the mid-40s as well, and they might well be linked to this. The interesting overlap, of course, is now that we'll have more people than ever before in the mid-40s in this, where you have potentially people entering the second stage of life who are rethinking, who become a bit more conscious about the way they act. And I find that fascinating. So what would this look like? Do we see a mass coming into consciousness, into true awareness in a country? And what would this even look like if more voters, because they will be the biggest voting cohort as well, if more voting cohorts don't have their own self-interest as much in mind as a larger picture? That means you would also expect political parties to tell bigger, grander stories, more collective stories, rather than the individual desire kind of narrative. And of course, we are here in very much speculative territory, but I think it's at least good fun to do so. But I'm not sure what this would look like.
Now, interestingly, at the same time, is it not true that divorces spike in midlife? Is this people reevaluating their life and their values at this stage?
Yeah, of course. Yeah, once you actually really sit down and think about, is this working for me? And you're right. Maybe it's a combination. We should look at divorce ages that have been creeping upwards, funnily enough, but also makes sense because we marry later in life. But so to go, is there a link? Is there a link there? And I think it might well be that we say, once you rethink your whole life, take an honest look at what do I actually want from my life? What is best? How do I best spend my time off the planet? And then you go, I do not need to keep this marriage going if it makes neither of us happy. And then that might well be an element. I love that point. Absolutely.
Now, a lot of people in their 40s seem to suddenly have a few more financial resources and are feeling more financially comfortable in their life. I know that at Metropole, we see a lot of people in their 40s and early 50s think, I better actually start putting something aside for my financial future. I know the government's not going to look after me. Super fund isn't going to be enough. So that's another perspective that seems to come in at this stage of life.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what we do, of course, see is, and it depends on the individual's life circumstances. So one of the arguments, of course, is that we now have people in the 40s with more financial responsibilities and pressures than in the past, because you have a bigger mortgage to pay down and you have children with you for longer into the future. So you have more financial pressures in your mid 40s than you arguably would have had 40, 50 years ago. So you could then say that potentially these financial pressures further delay the entrance into the second half of life. The start of the individuation process begins later in life, simply because you have too much stuff to do. You have too many bills to pay. You don't find the time, the financial freedom to actually tackle these issues. And then we could say, well, we are robbing our society out of years of a more aware, a more psychologically settled population, because we push them unnecessarily long under financial stress. So that argument, of course, isn't often linked with one another, which is what I try to do in this column, is to have a bit of a think about what does the individual life story mean, and how do our economic circumstances, how do they hinder or push this? And would we have seen millennials enter individuation already at 40 if money was more plentiful, if cost of living were cheaper? And I would love to have any kind of real data about this around the world.
Now, you're talking about your thinking, putting this column together, but I know your days are usually spent consulting and presenting to organizations, to companies, to policymakers. Clearly, this is important in the way you think about what our future holds for companies and individuals.
Yeah, these types of research I find very, very helpful in understanding what can happen in a certain life stage. So when you talk to clients and they have a workforce that is heavily moving towards the mid 40s, this is something you want to keep in the back of your mind. The same thing when what happens with a workforce that is nearing retirement? What happens with a very young workforce that you might, or customer cohort that you might be dealing with when you discuss a client's business? And you go, what do the psychological challenges that each client cohort faces at a certain stage of the life cycle, how do they play into something like staff retention, something into marketing? And all of those things find a hook there. And I see that the savvy businesses out there, they understand those issues, maybe intuitively, maybe consciously, but they make the most use of these bits of information.
I'll leave a link in the show notes to the Demographics Group, your organization, where people can get in contact with you to see how you can help them plan their business or their organization's future. But Simon, there's going to be some people listening to this who are in their 40s or even in their 50s and think, hey, I missed all that. I've now gone past that stage, and they feel stuck or left behind. What would you say to them?
Well, so the second stage of life is not necessarily linked to an age. So this can always enter. I'm sure there are quite a few people who entered this sooner in life, who had some sort of major event that made them rethink the way that they function. And quite often we see another trigger event for this could be an illness. And quite often serious illnesses, serious health shocks start in the mid 50s. This is when you have your first heart attack or whatever. And then people take quite dramatic steps after those health shocks, because all of a sudden everything was laid out. They need to face their own mortality. And then you go, I can't chase elusive goals anymore. I now need to come real close to my real self real fast. Retirement is another option where we discussed the 4 stages of retirement in the past, where you move into retirement and all of a sudden all the stability that maybe the first half of life, the structure gave you. It's like, chase the next promotion, chase the next car or holiday or whatever it is. These things gave you structure. And then in your retirement, they fall away. And you then are forced to question what actually matters. And then people enter this stage later in life. And again, as far as I'm concerned, there is no judgment when you enter a stage of life. And in developmental psychology, we say everyone has a right to their own stage of development. You can't criticize, for example, a 7-year-old for not being on the same level as their 11-year-old sibling. That makes intuitive sense for us because they are on their own journey and some things develop faster. And of course, you have an age advantage in that particular example. But ultimately, people live their own lives. They live through their own journeys, and certain kind of psychological milestones get achieved sooner with other people, later with another person. And so be it. But the second stage of life is worth looking into, but the process isn't easy because as we pointed out, it requires to look at your shadows. Your shadows are your dark personality aspects. These are the uncomfortable aspects of your personality. And you must, and this is where the term comes from, you must look at them. You must shine a light on your shadow to move forwards. And this type of shadow work is definitely uncomfortable. It is psychologically easier to not do it. It is easier to create a worldview full of conspiracy theories and hatred of others or something like this. It's changing the world is much, much easier than looking at your own shadow, which is why so many people do it and why it's such a hard challenge to actually look at your own dark past and personality aspects.
Well, I think it's great that you've made us aware of this and that this stage in the phase, it may not be 40 exactly, is for many of us a time of transition, reflection, and I guess, as you say, reinvention. It's when people start to prioritize meaning over all those milestones they set. And now they've actually got the tools, the freedom, and they've grown into the stage of their life where they can enjoy it and appreciate it. So that's great. Simon, thank you very much for your insights. Look forward to catching up with you again next week. And if you've actually enjoyed today's show, please just stop for a second, subscribe to this channel wherever you're listening to this, and tell somebody else about the show as well. Thanks for your time, Simon.
Oh, it's been a pleasure, as always.
This Demographics Decoded podcast has been brought to you by Metropole Property Strategists. We provide a complete range of services to help our clients safely create intergenerational wealth through strategic property and wealth advice. If you're looking to buy an investment property or your next home, why not have a discovery chat with one of our wealth strategists? Just go to metropole.com.au and explore your options. You'll find we're much more than just another buyer's agent. We provide a complete range of services, including property advisory, wealth advisory, home buying, buyer's agency, property management, renovations, and development management services. The team at Metropole will help you with frameworks that I've fine-tuned over 5 decades and we've been helping clients with for well over 25 years. We're big enough to tip the scales in your favour, but still small enough to care. In between these Demographics Decoded shows, you can follow me on social media, and I suggest you also follow Simon Kirstenmacher. You'll find him regularly posting on all social media platforms. And thanks for spending the last little while with Simon and me. I hope you got some benefit from the show. And if you did, and you know somebody who may also benefit, please tell them about Demographics Decoded. There's a share button on every podcast app. I hope you're going to be doing them a favour, and you're definitely going to be doing us a favour, helping us in our quest to make as many people as possible aware of the demographic changes that are going to be shaping their future. And of course, if you don't currently subscribe, we'd love you to. And of course, any of the information that we've been sharing with you is general information because we don't know your specific circumstances.